We are on our way to Warhammer Cafe in Tokyo, Japan. We'll be doing a couple other things, but in this video I won't be building any minis. We will be walking around and I'll be doing a vlog type scenario with it. Along with that, I'll be reading the book while we are in Tokyo at certain spots. So yeah, get ready for the next couple of videos, guys. Hope you enjoy them. Hope you've been enjoying everything else. Let's have a look at what's around us in this beautiful Air Canada lounge. All the little people. When you're high up. Jeez, it's loud in here. Yeah. Pretty decent little lounge. It's quite nice. But yeah, next time you guys see me, we'll be in Tokyo's airport. So yeah, stay tuned. Let me ask you a question and tell you a tale. Have you ever wanted something so bad in your life that you can taste it? Has there ever been something in your life that calls to you so strongly that you feel out of character and out of place when it's not in your life? Have you ever just wanted to do something so bad that you would sell everything you have in order to achieve that? Well, for me, that's Japan. Since I was 13 years old, I would say, I have always wanted to go to Japan. It started by picking up an import tuner magazine and seeing a Hakosuka, a Skyline R32, Skyline R34, Evo 5, all types of those. But furthermore, it's sitting down at the TV and then watching movies that depicted samurai, that depicted this lush green countryside as far as the eye can see, with people that spoke a different language. But not just any different language, a complex language that was like a symphony to the ears. It just clicked with my brain and made me feel and see myself there, enjoying everything about it, participating in their culture and the things they do, navigating that said countryside to see all the ins and outs of the trees and the oceans and the shrines, all placed in different spots within the countryside. In my life, I did that from 13 till now. It just nagged at me, made me yearn for it more and more. I just felt out of place in Canada. Being here just didn't seem like it was part of me. I'm not saying that I'm not Canadian. I am Canadian. I enjoy the cold. But I just felt like my soul was out of place. Like my body was meant to be Canadian, but my soul was meant to reside in a different country. Like it had been born from another country. Yeah, that may sound like a little bit of hogwash and all that Lucky Charm, crystal voodoo stuff that basic white women, get themselves into. But I'm serious. There's just something about the culture and the anime and the games and just the overall continuity that this country exudes with its people. The way that the transit system works fluidly, the way that it's organized. It's just a chaos in Tokyo that I can be a part of, and it doesn't seem stressful. Whereas if you come to Canada, it's chaotic and it's stressful. If that makes any sense to anybody. But Nonetheless, fortune gave me the ability to hop on a plane and find myself in Tokyo, Japan. And this next couple of vlogs will be me sitting down and reading a Warhammer novel in the place that I've wanted to go to since I found it. Since it's called to me. I'm now lucked out and got the chance to put my feet on this soil. Voltus paused and looked back at the others. Did you hear that? They were halfway down an unlit corridor, still following the trail of blood. Tanaro strode to his side and nodded. Projectile weapons? He gestured for his squad to advance, including Tanaro and Baraka. There were 8 members of the squad Tanaro remaining, plus Voltus, 9 veterans of the first company, enough to deal with almost any eventuality. As they reached an intersection, the sound of gunfire increased, making it clear the passageway they needed to choose. They turned left at the junction and raced down a smaller, equally dark corridor. Muzzle flashes blinked up ahead. I need one alive, said Voltus, giving Baraka a warning glance as they saw the doorway looming up ahead. Before Baraka could reply, they advanced through the doorway into an open, cavernous space. The corridor became a wide walkway of grilled metal that reached out across an abyss. Extending into darkness so deep that even Voltus's eyes could not pierce it. Other smaller walkways crossed in the darkness from other directions, all leading to a circular, hub-like platform at the center of the chamber. There were dozens of corpses scattered across the central platform. They were pilgrims, like the ones outside, their white robes gleaming in the darkness. 3 of them were still alive, firing at surrounding gantries. Bullets whined through the air and ricocheted off unseen metal. But the shots were wild and untargeted. One of them was screaming, shaking his head violently. As he fired, and the 2 others were flinching and twitching. All 3 were drenched in blood, picked out of the darkness by a single lumen dangling from a servo skull that was circling overhead. Any signs of the Xenos? Asked Tanaro, scanning the gloom, then looking at Voltus. Faint heat signals, Sergeant, he replied. East, north, and south. Tanaro nodded and waved at the squad. They advanced in silence, walking slowly across the bottomless drop, pistols raised. One of the pilgrims turned and looked their way, then began firing at them. The shots whined through the air or clanged harmlessly on their power armor. Hold your fire, boomed Tanaro. I'm Sergeant Tanaro of the Ultramarines 1st Company. There was a moment of silence as the pilgrims stared blindly in their direction. Then one of them called out, his voice hysterical. By the throne, help! Tanaro studied them in silence, then looked at Voltus. How many signals? Voltus just adjusted his equipment, studying the screen on his van brace. Far more than the small group Customon described. Then these are not just a few stowaways. Voltus shook his head. There are large numbers. They must have originated from multiple landing points. The pilgrims were screaming desperately into the darkness, begging for help, but the Ultramarines continued talking calmly. Why would Xenos gather here, Sergeant Tanaro? He looked up at the surrounding architecture. Shelter from the swell? Suggested Baraka. Voltus shook his head. But why were they waiting? Why not attack? They usually employ opportunistic predation patterns. I do not understand what would hold them back. Baraka grinned in the dark. My reputation precedes me. Tenaro gestured for the first squad to advance. He sent 3 of his men down one side of the walkway and 3 down the other. While he and Baraka advanced down the middle, but Voltus hesitated. There was something wrong, something familiar that he could not pin down. The others were only dozens of paces from pilgrims when he finally relented and followed them towards the platform. What is your business here? What is your business here? Demanded Sergeant Tenaro as he reached the center of the chamber and stepped out into the light. It was a pitiful scene, almost as dreadful as the mess outside the building. The 3 surviving pilgrims were close to death, their robes torn and dark with blood, and their eyes glazed and confused. 2 of them backed away, cowering as they saw who they had been firing at. But one who had called out held his ground. Looking up at the Ultramarines, he gripped an auto pistol with determined expression. He was heavily pierced with branches and painfully thin, with sodden black hair plastered down over his bony cheeks and large staring eyes. "My lords," he said, "forgive us. We could not see you in the darkness. And there was something in here. Monsters, they attacked us." His voice wavered as he looked down at his dead companions. "They vanished and left us like this." "What do they want with us?" cried one of the pilgrims. An old woman who was using a sword as a crutch, blood pouring from a gash in her neck. "Who's in charge?" The man flinched at Tenaro's harsh tone but nodded. "I am, my lord." "Please tell me your name." He took a deep breath, brushing his hair from his face. "I am Ephraim. We are Keft, guardians of the world roots. We are here because..." "When did the Xenos attack?" interrupted Voltus. "Was it at the same time as the swell hit?" "Yes." Ephraim was staring at the Ultramarines with a mixture of terror and awe. "No, I mean, I think I were in here before the swell." He glanced into the darkness as he spoke. "They forced us onto this platform." Voltus shook his head. "They forced you onto this platform? Or they herded you?" "I don't know. Perhaps it felt like that. They attacked." His voice wavered. "People died. But once they were on here, they're still watching us," hissed the old woman, clutching at her wounds, her eyes straining. "They're waiting. Why are they waiting? For throne's sake, please do something." Baraka strode to the edge of the platform and looked down one of the gantries. He hammered his pistol against the handrail, making a clattering sound that chimed through the darkness, causing the pilgrims to gasp. Voltus approached the gantry and stood at Baraka's side, waiting for a response, but there was nothing. He thought for a moment, then headed back to the platform, picked up a severed arm from a pile of dead pilgrims and hurled it down the gantry. It landed with a dull thud, splashing blood across the metalwork. A sound rose from the shadows, quiet at first, but growing louder. It sounded like air escaping from punctured tires, a wavering hiss that filled the darkness. Voltus looked back at Sergeant Tenaro. Tenaro nodded, signaling for the squad to head out onto the gantry. "Wait!" hissed Ephraim, sounding panicked, but the Ultramarines had already begun striding into the darkness. They maintained the same formation as before, 3 on one side, 3 on the other, with Tenaro and Baraka in the middle, and Voltus at the rear. They quickly saw figures up ahead, twitching in the shadows. They were similar in size to the pilgrims, but they were not uniform in shape. The first one Voltus saw clearly was like the creature Baraka had shot from the storm speeder, humanoid and upright, with powerful legs and talon-like forearms. As he moved further down the gantry, others came into focus. Most were similar in shape, but rather than having bone-scythe arms, they were clutching stomach-like organs or pipe-like growths that jutted from their limbs. Back on the platform, the pilgrims began screaming again, but Voltus blocked out the sounds, focusing on the flexing talons and flickering tongues up ahead. He examined each of the Xenos in detail as he clanged down the gantry towards him, cataloging and cross-referencing, comparing them to similar predators he had faced in the past. As Xenos watched the Ultramarines approach, they continued hissing, forcing air through their dagger-like rows of teeth. Eyes glinted in the darkness, black and featureless. Then with a final hiss, they attacked, hurtling down the gantry, moving at a spasmodic lurches. Baraka laughed hungrily and unslinging his side blaster from his pyre blaster from his back and gripping it with both hands.
Baraka, Tanara warned. They will be little use to Voltus as charcoal.
Baraka grunted a curse, but without breaking his stride, smoothly swapped his pyre blaster for his pistol and combat knife. Moist popping sounds filled the darkness. The Tyranids were squeezing gristly pipes that were attached to their abdomens. Glistening shapes spat from the pipes and whistled through the air, thudding into some of the Ultramarines, hitting with enough impact to slow their advance. Voltus passed one of his battle brothers, and saw thumb-sized bugs attached to his chest armor. They were digging frantically and trying to bore through the ceramite. Ultramarine cut them away with his combat knife and stamped on them, splitting the shells and splashing acid across the floor. More screams came from the platform. Voltus looked back and saw that some of the ticks had attached themselves to the old woman. She howled and thrashed as they flayed her alive, blood fountaining from her robes. The other two backed away, horrified and unable to help.
Target the Xenos that are using bioweapons, said Sergeant Tanaro. As the Tyranids rushed towards him, they have no symbionts on their back. Pistol fire only. They raised their bolt pistols and shot bark into the darkness. Light and noise filled the chamber, revealing a web of walkways surrounding them. Carapaces shattered and creatures tumbled through the gloom. As light flashed over the gantries, Ultramarines saw Tyranids on dozens of the walkways, lopping into view, gripping their living weapons. And they were not just on one level, they were also on gantries above the Ultramarines' heads and below their feet. Voltus took a step back and carefully shot away from the legs of the first Tyranid to reach him. Then he turned on his heel, firing at the ones sprinting at him from other directions. Most tumbled to the ground, but one broke through the barrage, slamming into his chest and forcing him backwards. It moved so fast that Voltus was unsure it was the species he needed or not. He lashed out with his combat knife, splitting its carapace, but rather than hindering it, the damage sent it into a frenzy. It bucked and convulsed, rattling talons against Voltus's armor. Bladed arms rained down blows on his head and chest. Its movements grew frantic as it screamed. The sound was thin and hideous, like the sound of an animal being slaughtered. Acid sprayed from its mouth, washing over Voltus's faceplate, hissing as on the visor and obscuring his view. Baraka was nearby, grappling and struggling with the same as Voltus, holding a Tyranid at arm's length and trying to disable it without killing it. Sergeant Tanaro hurled the Tyranid to the ground and shot it at point-blank range, drenching himself in venom. Clear a space, he ordered,
dropping the creatures with headshots. Voltus stood back to back with Baraka as they filled the air with bolt rounds and noise. As other Ultramarines followed suit, the Xenos returned fire, spitting parasites. Voltus paused and slammed a fresh magazine into his gun, making a quick calculation to work out how many rounds he had left. But then the attack ceased. The Tyranids stopped screaming and faded silently back into the shadows, leaving the dead sprawled across the gantries, steaming and sizzling. Baraka grunted and moved to follow them, reloading his gun. Tanaro grabbed him by the shoulder and shaking his head.
Tyranids do not retreat.
Baraka grunted and fired a last shot, kicking a distant shadow from the gantry. Voltus had the same feeling he'd had when he had first encountered the chamber, a sense of
that the situation was familiar, that he had experienced it before. As he peered into the shadows, he saw that they were glinting with dark, unblinking eyes.
Why did they cease the attack?
Behind them, the pilgrims were still screaming and howling, but the Ultramarines paid them no heed.
They appeared to be sounding us out,
said Sergeant Tenaro, kicking a severed alien head,
gauging our firepower.
Voltus looked back down the gantry they had used when they first entered the chamber. The faint light of the doorway had vanished, blocked by twitching silhouetted figures.
Unless this was all a trap. We thought we were here. We were the hunters, but perhaps we are the prey.
As he said the words, an image of the Harbinger filled his mind. He thought back to his child and looked at Baraka.
Do you remember how Otoks hunt back at home? Baraka nodded. They slaughter cattle and leave their carcasses as bait. Then, when larger creatures come to feed, they encircle them. He laughed grimly. The pilgrims were the lure? Exactly.
Then why are the Xenos still holding back, said Baraka. If this is where they wanted us, why not attack?
They may not have realized what they were hunting, said Tenaro loftily. I'll wager that Ultramarines are too rich for their blood.
Baraka grunted and marched down the walkway. Well, I see no other reason to. Tyranids exploded from the darkness. Some leapt at Baraka, scything at him, while others fired acid-drenched grubs. Baraka stood proud as he gunned them down, lighting up the hideous menagerie that surrounded him. The rest of the squad rushed to his side and opened fire. We can burn our way out, said. We can burn our way out, said Baraka, slapping the pyroblaster on his back and glancing at Tenaro.
Not until I've had a specimen.
Tenaro looked around. Have you seen the bioform you need? Are there any in here? Yes, several of the creatures have the strange symbionts attached to their back. Tenaro raised his voice, addressing the whole squad.
Advance to the exit. Engage the Xenos in combat. Once the apocryphy biologist has captured the specimen, open fire with plier blasters. If the Xenos follow us into the outer chambers, we will seal the exit.
Voltus tapped his canister and looked at his battle brothers.
Be sure I have what I need before you unleash hell.
Tenaro called back to the chamber's central platform, addressing the pilgrims.
We will cross the gantry at speed. Keep up, reach the next chamber and you will be safe.
The old woman was dead, but to their credit, the remaining two pilgrims readied themselves, taking deep breaths and checking their weapons.
The Emperor is watching, snapped Tenaro. Do not be found lacking.
The chamber trembled, and the pilgrims cried out as the Tyranid carcasses fell from the gantries, dropping into unseen depths.
The swell, barked Tenaro. It is strong enough to affect the geo-engine.
Baraka looked at Ephraim, who was stumbling onto the gantry.
Has the swell ever torn down one of these places?
The man appeared ready to pass out, but he shook his head. The Shires are eternal. World roots can't be damaged. The chamber shook with such force that some of the smaller gantries were dislodged from the walls, swinging loose with a scream of grinding metal. Clattering of hooves rang out as Xenos raced to safety.
This is not swell.
Voltus was gripped by a sudden certainty.
This is...
The wall collapsed. Spilling rain, gray light came into the chamber, and a shape strode into the view, stepping out into the central walkway. The creature was enormous, towering over the Ultramarines. Voltus recognized it instantly.
The Harbinger.
So here we are in Tokyo Disney, one of the other happiest places on Earth. And I thought I'd bring a little bit of grimdark to the happiest place on Earth. Because why not? Mickey always needed a little darkness in his life. Anyways, that was it for the chapter 14. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll be doing a couple more of these. I'll see you in the void.